Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathleen Krostick. I am the Partnerships Manager in the Office of Partnerships and Outreach. We really appreciate you joining us today for B2's webinar, Conversation with Safe Alternative Foundation for Education. Joining us today is Van Brooks, TU alumnus and founder and Executive Director of SAFE, and Matthew Durington, Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships at TU. We'll be hearing about the current and future work of SAFE, some COVID-related issues around what Baltimore is facing, and how to create a more equitable and inclusive space for nonprofits in the Baltimore area. Before I hand it over to Matthew and Van, just a few quick logistics. I'm sure pretty much everyone is used to this by now, but all attendees' videos will be off and your audio will be muted. But that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, we'd love to hear them. Just enter them in the Q&A section and we will get to them at the end of today's presentation. Additionally, the chat function is also enabled. So if there's anything you'd like to share either with the panelists or with all attendees, you can enter it there. And lastly, we will be recording today's session. So if you find it valuable, which I hope you will, feel free to pass it along to others. It will be posted on our website at towson.edu/btu. And with that, I will hand it over to Matthew to get started.
Great. All right, thank you, Kathleen. Thanks, Van, for joining us this morning. Really appreciate you giving us the time. So we're going to have a brief conversation, and then we're really looking forward to getting in some questions from the attendees so that we can expand on some of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into some of the topics that we want to address, Van, I was wondering if you could just tell the audience, for those who aren't familiar with your story and Safe Alternative Foundation for Education, tell us a little bit about your journey and creating the organization.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. And thanks for this opportunity to be a part of this. So my journey starts back in West Baltimore, born and raised in West Baltimore. I'm the youngest of 5, so I have 4 older sisters. And just with sacrifices that my parents had to make, they were able to afford to send me to private schools. And so growing up, I went to elementary school in Sandtown, Winchester. And then from there, I went on to Loyola Blakefield starting in 6th grade and eventually graduating from high school from there. While at Loyola, I became a 3-sport athlete. I was playing football, basketball, and lacrosse. Football was my passion, and that's what I thought was going to change my family's life and my life as well. And so that's really all I focused on. But one of the major things that my parents always drove home with me was the importance of having an education and the importance of having a backup plan for life, and that they weren't sending me to Loyola to play sports. They were sending me there to get an education. And lo and behold, my education will be the only thing I really could rely on at some point in my life, because during my junior year, while making a routine tackle in a football game, I broke my neck in 2 places, which left me paralyzed from the neck down, unable to do anything for myself. And I was 16 years old at the time. And everything that I had been working towards as far as athletics was immediately taken away. And I didn't have a backup plan because I wasn't listening to my parents when they said to me I needed something like that. My biggest thing was always nothing was going to happen and I was going to be successful. And so laying in the hospital bed, unable to do anything for myself, those conversations really started to run through my head. And so as soon as I was able to start talking again, I started taking classes in the hospital. I eventually graduated from Loyola on time for my class, eventually graduated from Towson University as well. And then actually the same year that I graduated from Towson, the idea of a nonprofit came to me from a dream. And so I set out to start my nonprofit, Safe Alternative Foundation for Education. And I've just been growing that ever since.
So how long has SAFE been around?
SAFE been around, it'll be 8 years this year.
Okay, great. And I saw that on social media. You just finished up your 5th summer camp as well. How'd that go?
It went really well. It was very important that we figured out how to do it in person. And I'm sure we'll talk more about this once we get started to talk about COVID and how COVID affected a lot. Right. But it went really well.
That's great.
Thanks.
That's great. So just generally speaking, before we get into some of the responsiveness to the COVID pandemic, what type of, just the lay of the land and the types of nonprofits that exist in Baltimore, and where do you think that they maybe fall short in terms of service, and how does the programming and services of SAFE meet the needs of the community that maybe some of those other nonprofits aren't responsive to?
Yeah. So one of the things that the first part of the question of what nonprofits are there in the city, I mean, there's a nonprofit to cover everything that this could possibly need, and so that that it's very broad on the nonprofits that are there. As far as where do other nonprofits fall short, honestly, I really can't answer that. But I can talk about SAFE and our approach to how we serve the community. And our approach is always from an inside out. Part of the reason why I wanted to start SAFE in my community is because I grew up there. I know everyone there. I know the ins and outs of the community. And I also understand the struggles that the community has. And as you go across Baltimore City, every community varies. The needs of each community vary. Even when we talk about my immediate neighborhood, we're part of the Southwest Baltimore. And Southwest Partnership comprises of 7 different communities within Southwest Baltimore. And literally every community has a different need. And so our approach has always been to come in and have the conversations with the community, have the conversations with the students who we serve and the people that we serve, and say, what is it that you need? And let us figure out how to deliver those things versus the traditional way of coming in saying, here's what we're going to offer, and it's pretty much you take it or leave it.
Yeah, it's such a good approach organically to get the rapport going and understand where people are coming from in order to actually meet them where they are rather than some blanket assumption of what folks may need. And I
Yes.
think that's where a lot of these programs have fallen short in responsiveness. And so, with that being said, there's a nonprofit for almost every single need. In fact, it's one of the biggest employment sectors for people in the Baltimore region. But what are some of the largest issues facing citizens of Baltimore that they're responding to? And how do you think the COVID pandemic has exacerbated those issues?
So right now, COVID, the issues that people are responding to is pretty much based around a lot of the COVID stuff. Um, and my opinions on some of those things that yes, while the community needs assistance dealing with COVID things, funding has also dictated that we need to focus more on COVID and maybe not as much as the other things that were providing. I think one of the problems that a lot of nonprofits are facing right now is that they may not have had the infrastructure to adapt to assist in the areas that are needed for COVID. I know for us, when COVID first hit, one thing that we did, and this was from experience, we actually took a step back. We didn't rush in to say this is what we're trying to figure out what the community needs. We took a step back because we knew so many resources, so many other people were going to step up to start to try to solve some of the issues. And so we wanted to be responsible and use our resources the best way that we could. And the only way to figure that out is to see where the gaps were once everyone else came in. And so our approach was just that. We took a couple of weeks and sat back and watched and listened. And then once we understood exactly where the gaps were, we came up with a plan of how we can address those issues. Another thing that COVID has really a way COVID has affected a lot of people was that the monetary things. It became really hard to fundraise for certain things or continue to run your program once COVID had hit.
And the landscape of philanthropy and all those things have changed. Some have been really responsive, but other things have kind of lagged a little bit too. So
Yes.
what are some of the I want to get to what we wanted to really talk to you about today, which we think is really exciting with some of the safe programming. But maybe you could walk folks through the types of program that SAFE usually does, and then how does that lead into this issue of workforce development
Yes.
and providing possible jobs and positions for Baltimore residents?
Yes. So our approach to COVID, again, when we took that step back, we began by our first initiative was to do everything virtual, of course. And so we did a virtual campaign called Together We Can, which was 10 weeks of various activities. So, and those activities range from Spanish classes to poetry, art, celebrity fitness is what we call it, where we had some former and current professional athletes come in and teach a workout class. So we did all of those things in response to when COVID hit because we knew that we had to have some sort of engagement. Now, SAFE is an after-school program. And so we typically will work with our kids on a normal day, 3 hours a day. And instead, with COVID hitting, we literally had to completely change our programming to where we're working with our kids all day, starting with the summer camp. Once summer camp started, it was important for us to get our kids together. And I believe we were, one of a handful of organizations that actually decided to do things in person. And it was a lot that we had to do to make sure that our kids were going to be safe. But once we figured it out, we went forward with it, and it was extremely successful. And what that showed to us was that kids just needed to be out the house, and they needed to be in a different environment, and they wanted to learn. They're anxious, and they want to do things besides being stuck in the house. And so now, when we're thinking about what's happening with the upcoming academic year, we're going to continue to do things in person. As you know, before we got on this call, when we were kind of talking before this, I mentioned that my team is doing whiteboard sessions right now to strategically plan on how we're going to implement our new program of literally operating from 8:30 to 2:30, taking the place of a school day. And so that's really big for us, considering, again, going back to that, we typically only work with our students for 3 hours a day. And now we're saying we're going to be working with them for 5 to 6 hours a day, taking the place of school and working closely with our partner school to ensure that they are getting the resources and the technology, as well as getting the academic support that they need to be successful this academic year.
Right, and your partner school is one that I know you've worked with some of our faculty, Zosha Stuckey, Carrie Grant, and the grant writing and valued environments. But tell us a little bit about that relationship with the partner school for SAFE.
Oh, it's new. We have a new principal that came in this past academic year, and so his first year was kind of all over the place,
Right.
Considering he was new there, and then the pandemic hit. But pretty much, we're going to be doing a learning pod for the school, and we wanted to relieve some of the stress that he was going to have around ensuring that some of his students have access to the things that they need, especially considering the expectations that the school, the districts have on our students this go around. Before, it just hit and everyone was kind of scrambling, trying to figure things out. But now there are, classes that are going to be taking place every single day that students need to be a part of. And so that partnership between him and I is that, or should I say the school and SAFE, is that we're going to fill in those gaps where the school can't. And while it may only be a certain amount of students, we're going to make sure that those students don't have to be worried about, because we're going to provide them with the support that they need, as well as thinking through how can we bring in some of the parents of students who may not be in our program, but bringing those parents to give them training on how to help their students at home log in and get into the Google Classrooms, and ensuring that they're doing the work that needs to be done in order for them to pass.
Yeah, it's almost like moving that community schools approach even into a wider terrain. I wish there was something or some way that could be replicated for other schools as well. Maybe that becomes a model that other folks could latch on to try to create those learning pods in these particular populations in the city.
Yeah, a lot of those conversations are happening.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to be on a conversation after this to learn more about what other people are doing and how I can help if needed. Because I'm in a lot of different groups with nonprofit leaders, and again, going back to the whole summer camp thing, we were one of a handful of people who decided to do things in person and actually figured it out. And so I'm sharing a lot of that information with some of the other nonprofits leaders that I work closely with on what our plans are for the academic year as far as the learning pods go. And if they're interested in doing that, here are the precautions that we've been taking that have been very successful. Right. Sharing those things. Hopefully they'll also begin to do some of the same.
That's great. So let's pivot the conversation a little bit and tell us about some of the stuff you've been working on in terms of workforce development for Baltimore residents.
So it's wild how this workforce development thing came about. When I was with the governor's office, as I was traveling across the state, a lot of people were talking about they needed jobs. And then I was also hearing a lot of companies saying that they have jobs, but they don't have people to fill those slots. And there was clearly a disconnect there. And there was that gap, again, thinking about the gaps and how can we fill those gaps. And so the workforce development came, the idea for that came out of just that need that I was hearing. And so when I left the governor's office and came back to my foundation full time, that was my first initiative that I was going to dive into, of opening up another center for workforce development. And then when COVID hit, that literally just made that need even greater, especially in my community. And so our approach to workforce development is going to be place-based. We're not looking to serve people from all across the city. We really want to hone in on a couple of communities and try to uplift the people in those communities as much as possible. And again, something that you brought up was about replicating things. We want to build models that can be replicated. Our model has always been to work with small cohorts of people. If we're ever going to get to 50 or 100 people, that will come from having multiple centers across the city, not from one center. And so we believe that by doing it that way, again, we're able to really test a lot of things really fast, evaluate those things and see what's being successful, and then later on replicate those when there's an opportunity to do so.
Along those lines, how could higher ed or other institutions effectively partner with nonprofits like SAFE to drive those kind of initiatives? If we know that the need is jobs and workforce development, where do you see some of the other players, some of the broader institutions that are in and around the region that could step up and effectively partner?
Yeah, so I think part of that is knowing who's doing what, right? I think not all organizations, one, have been built like SAFE has been built, as far as the basic foundations of being able to be flexible. Going from 3 hours, just using that as an example, going from 3 hours after school to literally 6 hours all day, that's a huge undertaking. And not many foundations are structured to be able to quickly transition and take on something like that. Whereas when building SAFE, I always strategically wanted to be flexible and be able to move around. And so one of the things could be the larger institutions identify some smaller grassroots organizations that are doing this really good work, and then help them with capacity building. It could be helping with capacity building. The program that you brought up with Zosha and that we have writing grants, that is huge for SAFE, because we have one grant writer who pumps out 40 to 50 grants a year. Right. But with the support of Zosha and the students, that's five to anywhere from 5 to 10 grants that my grant writer can take off of her plate. And so it's things like that go a very, very long way in supporting organizations. The other one is just inviting the grassroots organizations into certain rooms and letting them know what's there. I'm fortunate to have been able to be with the governor's office, and I love networking. I love meeting people. And so not everyone's like that. Not everyone is like that, where they can meet someone from Towson University and build a relationship like we've built, or meet someone from another institution and build those relationships. They may not have the know-how to do it, or they may not have the time. And so I think institutions could again step up by volunteering to support those organizations with some of those initiatives, and then also spreading the word about these other organizations. One of the things that I'm very big on with Zosha is, and we had a conversation about this, some of the organizations that I may refer to as Zosha, yes, we are in competition, air quotes competition, for the same funding. However, I think it's very important that TU is introduced to these organizations, and these organizations are introduced to someone at Towson University, where they don't have to look and say, how do we crack this code of becoming a partner with these organizations?
Right. And I know that's one of the things that we've talked about, and hopefully GIVE has expanded quite a bit. There's an additional faculty member, Carrie Grant, and more sections in the English department, and they really stepped up to create more offerings so that more small-led nonprofits and community groups could take advantage of that grant writing capacity. And then one of the great things has been watching TU students move on into grant writing positions with that experience too. But I think also letting higher ed, or not letting, but higher ed acting as a convener. If they are a known entity, why not be the network connector for those types of organizations to product? And I hate using opportunity and innovation at a time like this too, but if folks can't get to place A or place B, guess what? Now everyone knows how to use Zoom or other things too. So I think there's a lot of things going forward that we could talk about, but maybe forecasting out even a bit more, what other things do you think could be done to create more equity and inclusion for not just all nonprofits, but particularly for Black-led nonprofits in Baltimore, and open up more space and support mechanisms for those organizations to provide more equity and inclusion in this space?
Yes. So one is we have to work twice as hard and be twice as good to receive a portion of the funding that other organizations receive. Completely unfair. It becomes hard. It becomes really hard. And I think that if institutions can, and I hate to look at it this way, but a lot of times Black-led organizations need to be vetted, or they need to have a sponsor in a sense of someone that says, I support this organization, and this organization is a good organization. And so that makes things extremely hard, especially if some organizations just can't get that type of sponsorship or someone to step up on their behalf and say they're a really good organization. So I think we need to figure out a way that we can fund a lot of these Black-led organizations while also providing them with the capacity building support that are needed in order to grow or in order to be able to collect the data that a lot of funders would like to see to prove that the work that they're doing is working. Those would be some of the first things that will pop into my mind of how we can really begin to do that. And we also need to trust that these Black-led organizations are doing really good work. We just have to. Time and time again, I'll see other organizations receiving funding with no proof, but then when it comes to some Black-led organizations that may be doing similar work, we have to go through the ringer to prove why we should receive a grant for $5,000. And the way that the funding system, in my opinion, is that the way that the funding system is currently structured, it forces silos. It forces silos, and silos is a huge problem that we have in Baltimore City when it comes to the nonprofit work. Because if you know what my program is doing, then you have a one up on me, and then you can write for that funding. Versus if a funder said, let's collab, this is going to be a collaborative funding initiative where in order to receive this funding, you have to work with another organization. And of course, you have to make it worthwhile. It can't be $5,000 or $10,000. But I think that is something that needs to happen.
Yeah, I think that's another opportunity where maybe an institution like Towson could act in a number of different ways. That convener space, that networking space, marshaling the capacity for students to write grants as part of capacity building. And then we also have a couple of faculty members in political science, Don Morgs and Amina Salah, who are starting to do a lot of great work with looking at how different nonprofits, and particularly Black-led nonprofits, can be scaled up. In other words, sometimes it comes down to that 501c3 application or that Form 990, and making sure that if there is physical sponsorship, that things are done right in terms of assessment and reporting back, because sometimes it's just those logistical things that will push someone off the table for an application, as opposed to if they had just the catch or the sponsor or the resource to keep those things floating at the top so that they can access those funds. And for someone like yourself or a dynamic leader to have the space to operate and to network, And one of the things I know that you've heard and we've heard for another webinar earlier was the T. Rowe Prize Foundation talking about, the sharing the sugar, and maybe it's time for that. So I'm wondering if there's ways that you're thinking about how maybe this is with the reality of the pandemic and the conditions, but also the underlying conditions that have already been in place, what could be done maybe differently to help collaborative nonprofits really elevate their work and be able to match those requirements of fiscal sponsorship and other things?
Yeah, I wanna definitely give T. Rowe Price a shout out, because they are definitely leading the way when it comes to that capacity building for organizations. I would like to see, as far as the institutions, and let's just stick with Towson. Let's just use Towson University for an example. I think that a shared space, free of charge, of some sort to organizations will be extremely helpful. Or even if it's one, let's say, all organizations need a bookkeeper. Let's just use that as an example. Bookkeeping. We may not be able to pay for the type of bookkeeper that we would need. But what if we had a shared space and there was also a shared bookkeeper who would say, we will ensure that your books are in order and everything that you need to apply for this funding is going to be in order. And that's something you don't have to worry about. And then on top of that, we'll throw in some grant writers that will also take those things off your plate. And so the more that can be taken off of leaders' plates, the more a leader can be out in the community doing the work that really needs to be done, that's moving the needle, and don't have to worry about that back end stuff. You know, one of the biggest things that really surprised me, and I tell people this all the time, is I did not know it was going to be this much work involved with me growing this foundation. When I got involved, I saw a need and I wanted to try to fix and solve that need. But then I realized that I was being pulled away by doing the back end stuff, which is needed. And I was being pulled away from the actual work that was moving the needle to do the back end stuff. Whereas if I had someone that could truly help me with that back end stuff, I would have been able to really have a much larger impact sooner than what it has taken me, because it took time to do the back end stuff. It took time for me to build and to fundraise and to build out a team that will now allow me to go back out and do the things that I need. And so if an institution like Towson can step up and say, what is it that you all need collaboratively? What is it that you need? We'll give you a collaborative space. We'll give you someone that can write grants. We'll give you someone that can handle a lot of the back end things while you can go out and do the work. I think that would be huge. And I think that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, we do too. And I think, moving forward, we're hoping that when that capacity building space, we're going to be able to do that, maybe even replicate some of the great academic programs that have grown. We do have an accounting program, right? Maybe, what's happened with Give could happen with that, and really harnessing the specialized knowledge of not just the faculty, but these really entrepreneurial students. And the Towson student body tends to have a bit of more tenacity than some of the other institutions. So I'm really looking forward to us continuing that conversation and seeing what an institution like Towson can do to support not just SAFE, but all the nonprofits and the workforce development and other things that are occurring that you've really been on top of and have shown a great example going forward. So
can we talk about, and I'm not sure that, I think we are assuming that the audience knows what the Give is.
Yeah, sure. That's a great,
so you explain what Give is.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's good clarity. So Give is a program, grant writing in valued environments. And this really started as the initiative of Zosha Stuckey, who's a professor in English, with her students creating a grant writing course in the English department in the College of Liberal Arts at Towson University. And it's had wonderful success working with nonprofits and community groups in a very deliberative fashion over the last several years, to the point that now the course offerings have expanded. And there's two professors that are, in addition to Zosha, a professor named Carrie Grant, in multiple sections, working with more nonprofits every single year. And it's really just a win-win-win in that there's the groups benefit from getting the funding, but also one of the best components, for us is that liberal arts and other majors are often like, how are you going to get a job with that? Well, guess what? Here's English students, and the English, discipline's often called out for that, but they're getting jobs because they're getting this really valuable experience. And I know that they've worked really productively with you over the last few years as well. So thanks for that clarity. And like I said, I think there's room for replication there too, for higher ed institutions to really step up and look at those other pools of specialized knowledge that we can start directing towards these community engagement or places, and nonprofits is definitely one of those too.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well,
and I will back to, this is the last piece of that. When you talk about the job part of it, I actually hired someone from the Give program. Came on in the grant writing class, came on as an intern that summer, and now he's been working with us full time for the past 2 years.
Yeah, we love those stories.
So it works. It works.
Yeah. All right, that's great. I've got a couple of questions.
From
Lacey, who's asking, how did you pivot your fundraising strategy during COVID?
So, great question. So, what we did was we had conversations with some of the funders that were already there and asking them if we were able to allocate our funding to other things. But then, actually, some of the funders actually reached out and said, this may have been restricted funding for something specific, but if you need to switch it to something else, just let us know, and we're open to doing that. And so that was extremely helpful for us. And then another thing that we realized, even though it was more difficult to fundraise with the larger organizations and funders, a lot of individuals were stepping up and saying, "How can I support? And what can we support monetarily? Are you doing anything with programming?" Because they understood the importance of that. And so by doing some campaigns directed at individuals, we were able to fundraise specifically for the things that we wanted to do and needed to do for COVID.
Yeah, that's been one of the interesting things that we've seen too, that the institutions, when we know the digital divide and the access to computers and technology, and that's getting even more exacerbated with the pandemic and the move to virtual classrooms, and a lot of schools that needed equipment. But that's been one of the, I even talked to a couple of folks who work very closely with schools who said that rather than going the large, huge block grant philanthropy route to try to get equipment, how many individual donors, and if folks would look at their network, if someone's willing to give $250 on Giving Tuesday, why not instead move that to an organization that could get a Chromebook bought for a student, and encouraging individuals to really reach out directly to some organizations to see if it doesn't have to be maybe 35 computers, it could be 2 or 3 is going to go a long way.
Yep.
That's great. So another question from my colleague Don Wargs at Towson. You want to know what supports and resources have been most helpful during this time that have been coming in? What's been the most helpful?
So volunteers, we volunteers will be the one, especially when it came to doing things for the summer camp, because we didn't receive summer camp funding. A lot of people were still really focusing on other things, other parts of the COVID situation. And so we had to really dive in with our individual donors to see if they could support summer camp. And a lot of people stepped up and volunteered to support us via Skype, via Zoom, or those who are comfortable with coming in and teaching lessons that we probably would have had to pay for during the summer camp had it not been people were around looking for things to do. They have these expertise. They may not be working, or they may not be working a full, full on all day job. And they had time to take an hour to be with us. So that was extremely helpful for us, just the volunteers. And of course, monetary things are always important, but the volunteers for sure, being willing to help us out was huge.
And you mentioned T. Rowe Price. Are you receiving support from other regional corporations?
Yes, we are.
Okay, that's great. So it's been nice to see that responsiveness from the corporate side as well. Like really saying, okay, let's not go through the normal machinery here and bureaucracy, but let's get into the weeds and try to get direct services going to organizations.
Yeah, a lot of corporate people and organizations definitely stepped up and jumped in immediately, saying, let's identify who needs what, where the needs are, and let's cut down this process and all the red tape that we typically will have to go through in the applications. That's just, if you're doing good work, let's get support to you.
Right. So there's another question here about the workforce development project. Yes. So wondering, can you tell us a bit more about the partnerships at the center of the workforce development project, employers, training, placements, and I know you said the real hyper local strategy, but so what are some of the different partnerships that are at play?
So when it comes to the partnerships, we're still building this thing out. We would have had it done by now had it not been for COVID. COVID, monkey wrench and everything with us. And so we're about to start revisiting that next week and looking at, we have ideas of partners. We have ideas on who we think would be a really good fit. We just haven't really began to reach out to do those things. But to explain what we're looking at a couple of things with the Workforce Development Center. So teaching soft and technical skills, eliminating 3 major barriers that we identified to employment, which is why we're also focusing on being place-based, and then refurbishing houses. So coming in, teaching the soft skills, and these are soft skills that can be transferred to any job, not just the construction industry. And I didn't mention, but the Workforce Development Center is going to focus on construction. And so teaching the soft skills that could be transferred to any job, and then teaching the technical skills inside of empty houses in the neighborhood. And they're going to be renovating those houses, fixing those houses up. And so what will happen is once those houses are fixed, we'll put them on the market for affordable housing to really try to boost the community that way. While also, once the people go through our trainings, getting them employed with organizations or companies in the neighborhood that isn't too far away, getting them employed there so that way everything can stay right here in the community, and we begin to build the community up that way. So building the community up with housing, the impact that housing has, I won't even get into it because it's a huge impact.
Yeah.
The impact that having employment has. So having employment, being able to afford houses, healthcare, and all of those things. So that's basically the approach to that. And I'm more than willing to share more information about that offline. I can send some information about exactly what it is we're going to be doing there. But as far as the actual partners, we have some on paper, but we haven't begun to reach out to them yet.
Gotcha. It's understandable, but it sounds like it's a really, hitting the housing issue, and more it's not, can't just be about one and parceling off one issue after another. It needs to be a comprehensive approach that hits people's economic and social rights as much as anything else too. So one of the last questions we have is also, and I think this is probably a good way to maybe, forecast out a bit. What type of conversations should funders and grantees be having now? That comes from my colleague Amina Salah at Towson as well.
They should be having conversations around how can we grow the work that you're doing, expectations. Funders know that the work that needs to be done is going to take a lot of money. And sometimes I feel that nonprofits also know that's going to take a lot of money, but they're afraid to really say how much it's going to take for them to do it. And I think if funders open those doors to having those conversations, we know that, and it's not saying that we're going to fund it, but what is your real need? What is the real need, and how can we support in that? And whether it be them completely funding it, whether them funding part of it and then providing additional resources. And in those additional resources, it can even be making connections to other organizations or other potential funders. That's one conversation I believe that could be had. Another conversation I believe that should be had is how do we truly break down silos, and how do we really get people to begin to collaborate with each other? I believe again that the silos are part of the silos that we have is because of the funding. And so if a funder is willing to really take the lead on how can we truly break down those things, I think that would be extremely beneficial. And again, I'm going to go back to T. Rowe Price. I'm not sure if, and I'm sorry if this fire truck is riding by, if everyone can hear that. But T. Rowe Price, they just released a collaborative initiative with 4 Black-led organizations in Baltimore City. That's something that I haven't seen done before. Right. And I think that other institutions and funders should follow suit with that and begin to have those conversations with nonprofits as to how can we make this work.
Yeah, I think in that ecology of different ways to support that, if we have the corporate foundation with T. Rowe Price and the rapport building through community engagement with organizations like SAFE and all the other ones out there, maybe the higher ed institution can act as that hub to bring those things together, because there's no need for proprietary knowledge or anything else. It's about getting the playing field leveled and then also being able to rise up and support different nonprofits, in the region,
Mm-hmm.
in different places too.
Yes.
So one other question that just came in real quick, and I'm sure this is going to be part of it, but Mike wanted to know if, in addition to building technical skills, if you were going to look at including resume building, interview prep, recruiting tips, some of those other things.
Yes. So all of that, we're looking at a lot of the resume building and all of those things. We kind of box those into soft skills, and teaching how to interview, showing up on time, business etiquette, all of those things. We kind of group those under the soft skills portion of things. And I also just really want to shout out the Building for God Community Foundation for being a partner in helping us build out this workforce development center. They are another organization that understands it and that gets it. And they understand that, the power lies in the nonprofit leaders who are in the communities every day. And how can they step up and support, whether that be monetarily, or whether that be just with leadership and personal leadership development. And so that's another great organization that understands it, that gets in, has a really good model that could be replicated, or other people should be looking at and saying, how can we do something similar?
Gotcha. Well, here's to more people getting it.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything else that you wanted to impart today, Van?
I think just kind of recapping something, going back to how can the institutions like TU support local nonprofits, again, with programs like the GIVE program, possibly having free collaborative space, capacity building. All of those things will be huge in supporting nonprofits that are really doing the work that's moving the needle. We've seen a huge, there's already the gap in education. There's already the gap in exposure, and COVID has widened that gap. COVID has, widened that gap. But the people who are really trying to fill and fix the gap are the nonprofits. Especially as going back to the conversation that we had with the school system can't do certain things that nonprofits can, which is why the partnership with Franklin Squares is going to be huge for us right now in supporting them, because there are things that we can do that they just can't. And so if other nonprofits are equipped to be able to truly step in and fill those gaps, will be huge. And I think that institutions like TU and others could definitely prepare and support those nonprofits in doing those things.
Okay. Well, we hear you, and I think over the next several months with the BTU presidential priority and a lot of the work that we're trying to do through our community engagement and partnership strategies, that we're going to try to answer that call to the best of our ability.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for representing Towson University so well, Dan, and I just really appreciate you giving us the time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
All righty. Thanks for joining.
Take care.
You too.